I think it's a combination of things, right? Ultimately, he looked and sounded like a superstar, right? He raced like a superstar, but in 2001, everything I've ever seen, he was a championship threat. That going into the year that everybody thought, right? And unfortunately, obviously, lost his life at the 500, but he was a championship threat. So that only helps the legendary status, right? The stories, everything, the unbelievableness of Junior coming back and winning, the impact he had with DEI, everything. Like he just lived on, so much more. His story theoretically wasn't done, right? Because with Junior coming back, with Steve Park winning after, I mean that, stuff like that is just unbelievable. And at the sport's highest, right? You have documentaries coming out with him. I remember, the day I watched that religiously as a kid. I watched all the pre and post race documentaries or the Speed Channel documentaries, and they just told the unbelievable stories 1,000 times, and eventually the stories become almost unrealistic, and like the legendary of it. He becomes what he was, immortal to the non-NASCAR fans, bigger than NASCAR, the whole ordeal. So it's just I think that's realistically why you see people that don't even know NASCAR, they know exactly who Dale Earnhardt is if you ask them.
I think although we weren't alive to see him do, at least I wasn't. At least I wasn't alive to see what he did, live and as it was happening. But you look back on it, you see the interviews of the kind. You quickly realize and find out the kind of person he is. And I've been friends with Dale for a little bit, and just the stories I've heard about the guy. Like he's, I never got to meet him obviously, but everybody who did work with him and just the way that people viewed him and the stories about him, I think that legacy will carry on forever. And I think that shows today. I think he's one of the most highest selling, his name is one of the most highest selling brands in our sport still today. And that's kind of a testament to the person and the way the fans treated him and viewed him. And hopefully we can carry that legacy on forever.
I think he was just such an outgoing figure for the sport. Obviously, he had the success, but I think he did a really good job at speaking his mind and understanding what was good for the sport at the time. And I don't know, he's just such a unique figure in our sport, and I feel like Dale Jr. has done a great job at. I don't think he's necessarily taken the reins by any means of that, but he's just done a great job at being outspoken on how he feels about the sport. And I feel like a lot of fans can really relate to that and how they feel. And having guys like Dale Earnhardt a long time ago do that on a big stage and kind of portray the way they feel about the sport and everything without making anyone mad, I guess, was a pretty good attribute. I feel like a lot of people look at it as like whining and stuff now, but at the time it was productive. I feel like everyone wants what's best for the sport, and he obviously did a great job at making the sport a better place.
Obviously, I think that Dale Sr. was one of the best to ever do it statistically, right? And I think that Dale had a lot of fans and a lot of people that were rooting for him, and also a lot of viewers. But everybody respected Dale. And I think that the old generation, obviously the sport was at its peak, I think then, and it's only going to be at its peak again soon. I think he just was the biggest name in the whole deal. But also I think the old school races are badass, like AJ Foyt, Mario Andretti, Dale Sr., Ayrton Senna. Like there's a lot of great guys that were racers back then, and I just think I really don't know. I just think that their names were big at the sport, and the sport was at its biggest time, but also they were bad dudes too, so that's what it was.
I'd say the footprint he left behind, truthfully. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. I personally didn't have a relationship with Dale Earnhardt at all. I know him as the footprint he left on the sport. He was a huge, huge part of why NASCAR became what it was. As he started finding success, inherited his name as the Intimidator. All of those things were a tribute to the growth of NASCAR in America, in my opinion, from my view. So he left a huge footprint on the sport, and then I wouldn't say his son, Dale Jr., picked it up and carried it on, but I'd say that Dale's career definitely had another tying existence in that. Dale Earnhardt Jr. for me would be more of a Dale Earnhardt Sr. to people before my generation, how they view Dale Sr. I view Dale Jr. like others view Dale Sr. I look up to him and Jimmy Johnson because of the footprint that they made in their career in NASCAR. So I think that's really why a lot of people, view so highly of him, because he had such an amazing career. Truthfully, he had a certain persona that he carried out. He had all these different characteristics that really made, the Intimidator who he was, and people respected that. It was different. They loved it.
How did you learn about who Dale Earnhardt was?
Originally, I really don't know. I was probably really young, but he had to pass probably within the year when I was born. I was born on July 5th, so that would have been, I guess a year and a half before probably at that point. But I grew up a NASCAR fan, and if you're a NASCAR fan, you probably know who Dale Earnhardt was and the legacy that he left behind him. So I'm not exactly sure kind of how I was brought up into that, but my dad taught me pretty much all the pre-birth NASCAR knowledge I know to my name. So he probably was the one that kind of educated me on that.
I was a big Junior fan, but with all the Dale documentaries out there, The Day was probably the biggest one. You had every possible way to hear everybody tell the stories or learn the stories or learn who he was. And and the same deal. I never saw him, right? So the stories that I've seen are all the good days. I've never really seen a race other than going back and physically watching it myself. But if I only watched what I watched as a kid, you think he never lost a race, right? Other than the 1900s, but even when he won, it's the biggest 500 there ever was. So unbelievable. And thank goodness we had him and the stories we do of him.